obviously they got rid of Rwanda, which is the deterrent plan, which never, of course, fully came into effect at all. And they're going to smash the gangs. Well, we've heard that for a long time now. And one thing that's been announced by the Home Secretary is this idea that she will restrict people's social media accounts and restrict their phone usage and things like if they're suspected of being part of a terror gang who happens a smuggling gang, which happens to be in the UK at the time, because obviously you can only legislate within our own borders. Is that going to make any difference? Let's talk to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Good morning to you. I mean, on the surface, it's hard to see what difference this would actually make.
Good morning, and firstly, Happy New Year to you and all of your viewers as well. Look, I agree with you. These are very, very minor measures the government's announced that are frankly going to make no difference at all. The idea that telling a people smuggler they might get their mobile phone confiscated is going to make the slightest bit of difference is frankly fanciful. The government have completely failed so far to smash the gangs, as they keep putting it. And this is the same government, of course, the same Labour Party who voted against life sentences for those very same gangs when they were in opposition. And on their watch, since the election, now 6 months ago, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by 29% compared to last year. About 1,500 illegal immigrants have crossed in the last week alone. And I think it was a huge mistake of Labour to scrap the Rwanda deterrent before it even started. The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, and Labour cancelled it before that plane had a chance to leave. And I think if that had started, then we would see the numbers dramatically reducing. We saw that work in Australia about 10 years ago when they removed people to an island called Nauru. And it stands to common sense. If an immigrant is thinking of crossing the Channel, but they know they're going to get sent straight to Rwanda, they're not going to bother crossing in the first place. So a massive mistake by Labour to cancel that scheme. And all we get in its place are these extremely weak measures that are going to frankly make no difference whatsoever.
But that's the point, isn't it? That the flights never took off to Rwanda. We will never know if it was going to work because it never actually, quite literally, got off the ground. It was a huge expensive scheme. Robert Jenrick has even admitted that it would have been fruitless because you hadn't left the ECHR. Those flights would never have taken off and it never would have worked. There's no point describing it as some panacea to the illegal migration problem when it wasn't ever actually going to get off the ground.
Well, I mean, we had two sets of legal challenges, one in Strasbourg and one in the Supreme Court here in the UK. And we passed a bill, an Act of Parliament that went through Parliament in the first half of this year that was designed to basically sort out those legal problems and enable that first flight to take off on July the 24th. And it was a huge mistake to cancel it. As I say, we passed a law, the Safety of Rwanda Act. It's on the statute book. You know, the monarch signed it. We were ready to go by July, but Labour cancelled it. Now, you say it's speculative that it would have worked. Now, we've seen a scheme like this work in Australia. Now, Australia had a problem about 10 years ago where illegal immigrants were crossing from Indonesia to Australia, and they had a similar plan where they removed people to Nauru, which is an island in the Pacific, and they didn't have to take many people there before the deterrent effect meant that the illegal immigrants simply stopped attempting to cross to Australia. Why would you try and cross if you're just going to end up on an island in the middle of the Pacific? And it worked very, very quickly. So we do know these schemes worked, and it was a horrendous mistake of Labour to cancel it, and it is on them that illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up 29% since the election, whereas last year, 2023, we actually got it down by a third, and that was without Rwanda. Had Rwanda started, it would have gone down, I think, even more. In Australia, it went down to zero.
Part of the issue is, though, because it's all well and good from the opposition benches decrying what the government's doing, but of course immigration, and we now know sort of net migration jumped to 900,000 in a year, which under the Tory government, of course. The ECHR is going to prove to be a problem when it comes to removals, and yet your leader isn't convinced that we should be leaving the ECHR. She says, we need to wait and see. So it does beg a question, does the opposition have a real plan?
Yeah, so look, there were mistakes made in government previously, and Kemi and I have openly acknowledged that. That number, which was a couple of years ago, was far, far too high. So we gave a speech a few weeks ago saying that we're going to have a hard cap, which is going to be at a much, much lower number than that, because that is far, far too high, completely unacceptable. That should never have been allowed to happen, and it was a Conservative government, and that was a mistake. And that's why we're going to have a hard cap in the future, so that can never, ever happen again. Now, the numbers were coming down after that because we made some changes about a year ago. Argued that those changes were made too late, but they were changes that we made in government. We started to get the numbers down. The number of visas, which are a leading indicator, have gone down even more. So the health and social care visas down 84%, student dependents also down 84%, work visas down 28%. So those measures begun to kick in, but we do need to do more, and that's why we proposed a hard cap. On the ECHR, that is absolutely under review. We are prepared, if necessary, to come out of it. We're reviewing it very carefully. What we're not going to do is make sort of simple, off-the-cuff commitments without having thought them through properly. So we are reviewing all of this in detail so we can come up with a credible plan that your viewers and the public and the media can scrutinise in due course. And so people will know that it is going to work and that we are serious. We're not just going to say stuff off the cuff without thinking it through properly first. We've seen the Labour government make that mistake where they've got into all kinds of difficulty in government because they didn't do the thinking in opposition. That's why things are going so badly wrong for Labour. We're not going to make that mistake.
No, you've admitted that you've made mistakes whilst you were in government. You're now pointing out what you say are the mistakes of the Labour government now. I mean, all of this is fuelling the rise of reform, isn't it? What are you going to do about the threat of reform?
Well, look, I think, first of all, we saw at the general election last July that, unfortunately, where people vote reform, it just delivers a Labour landslide, unfortunately. And, you know, we saw that happen where people who ordinarily vote Conservative, voted reform. I understand why that happened, and we're going to work hard to fix the issues that we've talked about already. But where people who are conservatively minded vote reform, it just delivers Labour in government. We've also seen since the election about 150 council by-elections, and the Conservatives have made, I think, about 24 gains. Labour have lost 27 seats. Reform have only won an extra, I think it's 5 or 6. So we can see, that since the election, we have been doing very well in these council by-elections. And the final point comes back to what I said a minute ago, that we are working up serious and credible plans, not just on immigration, but on all kinds of other areas as well, taxation, the economy, the cost of living, really serious and credible plans to fix the problems that our nation faces. Whereas reform, I think, just tend to sort of say stuff off the cuff without kind of properly thinking it through. We are going to do the proper thinking so that when we come to the next election, we've got proper, detailed, credible plans that we can stand behind and implement on day one if we get back into government. So those are the reasons why we're, fighting so hard now in opposition.
Chris Phil, can we ask you about what's happened stateside? We've got this incident and 1 dead and a number injured in Vegas, and of course the situation in New Orleans, 30 injured, 15 dead. That we know of so far in what appears to be an ISIS-related terror attack. It raises some very real questions, doesn't it, as to what's happening over here in the UK, because it's got to put the security services on high alert now, hasn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. And look, we should just start by, I think, keeping the victims and their families in our thoughts and our prayers. The new year is a time to look forward to the future, a time of hope and a time of expectation. But for those victims and their families, that hope and expectation that a new year brings has been cruelly cut short by what appears to be a vicious terrorist attack by someone who was apparently motivated by essentially Islamist motives. President Biden has said he'd been viewing ISIS or Daesh material online. He had a Daesh flag in his car. So we should, I think, keep those victims in our minds this morning. But yes, you raised a good question. Our security services over the last few years have disrupted a large number of terrorist plots here in the UK, and I think we should be thankful that counter-terrorism policing, MI5 and the security services more widely have done that work keeping us safe. The majority of those plots have been Islamist in nature. So it does mean I think our security services do need to step up and redouble the efforts they've been making so far, but also all of us in the community need to be very vigilant, and everybody in society, and I stress everybody, that comes across any sort of information which suggests an individual or a group may be getting radicalised, need to report it immediately to the police. Doesn't matter, who it is or what it is, they need to report it straight away, because we need everybody in the public to be supporting counter-terrorism policing and the security services in the work they are doing to keep us safe.